So I ended up buying this book. This is a textbook from a library, and I'm getting this thing for like 25 cents, a textbook about all of history. And I've been really wanting to learn pretty much the the general understanding of all of history, and then from there, after I figure out what I like the most and go deeper into that. Just real quick thing, I love Alexander the Great, Roman, just the Roman period, World War II, World War One, the Cold War. Those are definitely my favorite parts of history to learn about. I would never want to be alive during them, especially not World War II. But I have this book here, World History Connection to Today. So my goal is I believe, let me see. I believe there's 37 chapters. Yeah, there's 37 chapters. My goal is if I can go through one chapter a day. Some of them are more dense, so we'll even just say half a chapter, one chapter to half a chapter per day. I figure within the next 100 days, I'll be able to, not even that, maybe like 70, I'll be able to have gone through this entire thing. And that's also on top of doing like my normal reading, things like I actually enjoy. Like for example, right now I'm reading Gone Girl, amazing book. But that's my goal, learn all history. What I'm doing right now is, I'm not just reading it, but I'm following like a system. I don't remember exactly, but if I'm just going off the top of my head, I basically start off just by reading all the headline. I start off by reading the questions, so my brain then knows what to look for. Like, what are the main things that I'm supposed to know? From there, I read all the headlines, like all the bold. Then I just and then from there, I then read just the first paragraph and the last paragraph of every sentence. So if there's a sentence, I'll read the first paragraph, last paragraph, and I'll do that for the whole thing, just so I can sort of get more context. And then from there, I'll just basically read the parts that I think are important, and then I just take down notes on everything. So I'm recording this stuff just so I can get more retention, because my idea is if I can read it, take notes on it, and then from there, then teach it, my level of comprehension will be much higher, and the chances of me forgetting it are going to decrease. So I just want to start off with what I did today. And today I studied early civilization. So my goal of just doing this is just so I can stay organized and not just ramble forever. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the pages, and then at the end of every section where it says review, I'm then just going to basically define everything. So starting off with the beginning of civilization, it starts off with prehistory. Prehistory, I actually found it pretty interesting. I actually never knew this, but prehistory is anything that is everything before things start to be recorded. I guess if you think about it logically, it makes sense. And then there's archaeology. Archaeology is something I'm still kind of just teeter-tottering on understanding, but from my understanding, archaeology is just a study of artifacts or physical things. From there, we have artifacts. So an artifact is just a thing, like a physical item that is from ancient times usually. It can be, I believe an artifact could be something like a tool, that's something that's found underground. What is the definition of technology? I have no idea, to be completely frank. I have a general idea what the concept of technology is, but I don't know the specific definition. I don't think that really matters, as long as you know what it is. A historian, pretty self-explanatory. A historian is someone that studies history, or someone that studies the past. Geography is just a study of the world. From there we have latitude. Latitude is up and down, north and south. Longitude is east and west. So how do archaeologists learn about the lives of prehistoric people? Archaeologists learn about the lives of prehistoric people by going underground, I believe, and digging and looking for artifacts. Yeah, that's how they do it. What kind of evidence do they use to study the past? Artifacts, physical items from the past. And then from there, I believe it's through, I can't remember the exact term. Well, there's a thing, it might be carbon dating. I know they do carbon dating with rocks. So I would imagine it'd be something similar to carbon dating to figure out how old the item is. And then have here, section 2, identify the Paleolithic age, the Neolithic age, and the Scarabray. I think I said that wrong. Who gives a fuck? So the Paleolithic age I got also my notes here just for a little bit of an outline. Started about 10,000 years ago. It might even be later than that, but that's just from what we know for certain, or as certain as you can be about these things. And the Paleolithic Age was when, also known as the Stone Age. Stone Age, it's when we were using stone tools. During this time, people were nomads. Nomads were people that basically, a nomad is someone that lives in the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. They just move around. So nomads typically, back in about 10,000 BC, would be in tribes essentially from groups of 20 to 30 people. And then from there, they would, usually the men would do things like hunting and fishing. The women, the children would be responsible for the gathering of plants. And then from there, we also started to have early forms of, medicine. Not medicine as we know today, but through plants, they could figure out what could treat wounds and things like that. At least what they thought did that. The medicine in the past it's kind of scary how bad it is compared to how good medicine is today. And then from there, the Skara Brae, I'm not sure how you say that, I think that's it. But from my understanding, it's one of the earliest villages. Yeah, my bad. I forgot to explain something. So the Paleolithic Age, this was the Stone Age. This is when people live in tribes, 20 to 30 people. They then eventually realized, hey, we can domesticate animals and we can grow plants, aka farming. So once they realized that, that's when civilization really started to boom, and that's called the Neolithic Age. Or it's also known as the New Stone Age. So during this time, that's when population started to increase because people were able to live in one place. And since there's farming and they started domesticating animals, there's a surplus in food supply. So since there was more food, that then resulted in there being a higher population because people were better fed, people were living longer because they weren't starving and they weren't as exposed to harsh conditions because they're villages. Now, the Skara Brae was one of the earliest villages that there ever was, from my understanding, at least according to this text. And I believe, if I remember correctly, when I was reading that was estimated to be about 5,000 years ago. That's how old that village was. During this time, a nomad, I defined that, a glacier, it's a freaking glacier, bro. It's a giant thing of snow. Well, a giant thing of ice, that's what a glacier is. I'm sure that's a better way to define that, but that's just what I'm going off of. How did the Paleolithic people learn to adapt to their environment? Okay, I already talked about that. Ooh, this was actually really interesting. The early people that never knew this actually had religion. We don't know this for certain, but we can infer that they did have religion because what they did is, I believe it was when, I don't know if they're archaeologists. I believe they're archaeologists. Or archaeologists, yeah. Archaeologists, I believe. I might be using the wrong term, but one of those guys, people that dig underground and find good stuff, old stuff. I think it's archaeologists or architect. Yeah, archaeologists. An architect is for buildings. So yeah, archaeologists ended up discovering tombs from people from the Paleolithic Age, i.e. tribespeople. So what they would do is they would bury their dead. Same thing in the Neolithic Age. And in the Neolithic Age specifically, people would be found in tombs and they'd be surrounded by stone. And then from there, they'd be oftentimes found with tools. So what we can infer by this is that the early notion of religion was that people needed these tools and things to bring them with them going into the afterlife. So we can only assume that if they're giving dead people tools, then they must have been religious. One more summary. Okay, so we then have this, section 3. So bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is something that I'm still struggling to comprehend. I'm going to do some more reading on this. But bureaucracy, from my understanding, is basically, it's a system to organize people. It's a system of government through departments. So one person is in charge of tax, one person is in charge of the irrigation, i.e. the water supply. Each person in the government is appointed to a specific task to, I believe the overall idea is to prevent someone from getting overwhelmed from doing a tons of different things. Essentially, it's just departmentalizing government. I'm not even sure that's a real word, but I think you guys get what I'm trying to say. Okay. So then from there, we then have polytheistic. This is just when someone believes in more than one god, because monotheistic, mono means one, theistic as in one god. So artisan, this is something I'm still a little confused about, but from my understanding, these are people that would make things like jewelry and they were skilled craft workers who made things like pottery, wooden, woven goods, things like jewelry. A pictogram, I remember this one though. So a pictogram back in the day, before language was as sophisticated in a way where they were able to write it out, a pictogram is essentially just a simple painting or drawing. I don't know, they didn't have pen back then. A simple painting usually, it's like some kind of creation. Yeah, a simple drawing to show words represented because they didn't write it out. And from there, we then have a scribe. A scribe were people that were appointed to only writing. Writing was their entire job. So to be more specific, a scribe was someone that learned to read and write. They were educated in the temple, and they kept records usually for priests, rulers, and merchants. And that's literally straight out of the text from President's Hall, World History, Connection to Today. That's a quote from them. This is not copyright. No plagiarism here, guys. And then from there, we then have a city-state. A city-state is a concept I do not understand, so I'm just going to read what it says. So, as ancient rulers became more and more powerful, they gained power, right? So during this time, they would conquer territories beyond their city. So they were, and then from there, this expansion led to the rise of something called the city-state. So that's a political unit that included a city and its surrounding villages, land, and lands. So rulers, nobles, and priests often controlled the land outside of the city and forced peasants to grow crops on it. A large portion of each harvest went to support the governments and temples. So basically what I'm hearing from that is, now that I'm rereading it, I think I'm starting to have a better understanding. I'm actually going to highlight this so I remember to revisit this. But basically my conclusion from reading that is essentially someone like a priest, a noble, or some other ruler, some other asshole, would basically say, hey guys, I'm in charge of the city. And then from there would then go out, conquer other territories beyond it, and be like, hey guys, someone's got to take care of this land. Yo, Pablo, get your ass over here and start working on this farmland. By the way, I did not mean to say Pablo because that's a Latin name. Fucking relax, okay? But hey, Pablito, if you're trying to get this, man, though, I ain't gonna stop you. But seriously, though, that's pretty much my interpretation of it. From there, we then have an empire. An empire is pretty not dope, but essentially, an empire is just basically how it happens is you have some really powerful guy. There's cities and villages, i.e., other states around the state that the emperor is in, like the current ruler, and then he then goes around, fights those other people, beats them in battle, takes their land, conquers it, and oftentimes what would happen is the people that were defeated could either join the empire if they were fortunate enough and they'd all be under that one ruler, or they would then just become slaves and then they would just take their land and then that would just be theirs and those people's lives suck. Also, really interesting thing, I was reading this. Slaves are not necessarily what we thought. So most slaves were either really poor people, so people that were in crippling debt and then basically sold themselves into slavery as a means to pay off their debt. That's some call an indentured servant, by the way. And then there's also how most of the slaves came to be, which either they were prisoners, and then they then became slaves because they did bad things if they were fortunate enough not to get the death penalty. Or from there, what happened most of the time is after a war, after someone would get conquered, usually the men were fighting the war, so most of the men would be dead. As a result, most slaves were actually women and children. So there's that. We then have a steppe. I have no idea how the hell you say that word, but basically, steppes were essentially nomadic herders that were responsible for cattle, sheep, goats, and other animals. Usually, and then culture diffusion, pretty simple. The idea of culture diffusion is that it's a spread of ideas and customs and technologies that they spread across from people to people. So that was chapter 1, all the main things that I learned from President's Hall World History of today. Can't believe it, to be completely honest. I feel like if I do this every day, I'm going to become a hell of a lot smarter. Because already today, my mind's like...